Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Medisodes. Today, we're going to be covering some of the medicines that are used to treat COVID-19. So, as we all know, COVID-19 is a virus that's caused death and destruction across the world over the last 2 years. And it's really important in our fight against COVID that we have medications that we can use. So, let's go straight into the first one. And Adrian's going to be talking about Remdesivir and Ritonavir.
To start off with, I'll discuss Pfizer's pill against COVID-19, Paxlovid. Paxlovid is the brand name for the drugs Dexamethasone and Ritonavir. It's an antiviral medication developed specifically to combat COVID-19. Paxlovid works as a protease inhibitor, binding to 3CL-like protease and inhibiting its action. This protease is an enzyme crucial to the virus's function and reproduction. In this way, Paxlovid combats COVID-19 directly by stopping its reproduction, thus reducing numbers of viruses in the body. According to an interim analysis, Paxlovid reduced the risk of hospitalization due to COVID-19 by 89% in those who received treatment within days of symptom onset. The drug was found to be so effective that 1% of patients who received Paxlovid were hospitalized through day 28, compared to 6.7% of placebo patients. But its Phase 2 and Phase 3 trials ended early. A regulatory submission to the FDA and other regulatory authorities was filed sooner than expected. Moreover, 10 deaths were reported among the placebo patients, while none occurred among patients who received Paxlovid. Paxlovid consists of two main components, Remdesivir and Ritonavir. The first of these was newly developed while researching a drug that could combat COVID-19 specifically. It is the component that specifically targets the enzyme I mentioned earlier. Ritonavir is a component of several other antiviral medications, such as those used to treat HIV, and is included in Paxlovid to extend the activity of Ritonavir. In early November 2021, the UK purchased 250,000 courses of Paxlovid, ahead of the drug's approval. In efforts to expand global access to the drug, Pfizer signed an agreement with the UN-backed Medicines Patent Pool to allow generic manufacturers to produce copies of the drug in 95 low and middle income countries. Pfizer has said that the therapy will be offered through a tiered pricing model, which will see higher and upper middle income nations pay more than lower income countries high and upper middle income nations pay more, and lower income countries being charged a not-for-profit fee. Despite these arrangements, not all countries in the world are covered, and notably, most of Latin America and the Caribbean are left out of this agreement. It was only recently, on the 10th of February 2022, China approved the use of Paxlovid in its country. This was a conditional approval rather than full. This makes Paxlovid the full oral pill to be specifically developed to treat COVID-19 to be cleared in the country. The approval is a boost to Pfizer, which expects $22 billion in 2022 sales because of this agreement. China has kept daily numbers of new COVID-19 patients below 250, sometimes fewer than 10. In the past year, a figure that is incredibly small for its massive population of 1.4 billion people. This is mostly due to China's strict approach of quickly containing any local flare-ups as soon as possible, its weeks-long quarantine requirements for most travelers around the world. China has yet to approve any COVID-19 vaccines developed by foreign drug makers. It has vaccinated over 87% of its entire population using domestically developed shots, notably Sinopharm. So that's covered Paxlovid in its basics, how it works and how it's been distributed around the world. Now I'll hand over to Anupam, who will be discussing Remdesivir.
Remdesivir is a drug that has received a lot of attention in the media, especially due to its early endorsement by the then US President Donald Trump. But Remdesivir was actually originally developed by the company Gilead Sciences as a treatment for the hepatitis C disease. It was later investigated as a potential treatment for both the Ebola virus and Marburg virus infections. However, it had little success against all three of these diseases. Remdesivir was approved for medical use in the United States in October 2020 against the COVID-19 pandemic. The US FDA, or Food and Drug Administration, approved Remdesivir based on their analysis of data from 3 randomized controlled clinical trials that included participants hospitalized with mild to severe COVID-19. They were aiming to find the use of Remdesivir in the recovery process of COVID-19. It was never intended to be a cure or treatment for COVID-19 during the early stages of the disease's progression. On the 20th of March 2020, the then United States President Donald Trump announced that Remdesivir was available for compassionate use for people with COVID-19. And this statement was confirmed by FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn at the same press conference. However, it was later revealed that Gilead had been providing Remdesivir in response to compassionate use requests since 25th of January of 2020. A compassionate use case, for those of you who don't know, is the use of an unapproved drug or medical device outside of normal legal requirements for patients who have serious or life-threatening conditions but are not valid for a clinical trial in progress. Remdesivir, for its synthesis, requires 70 raw materials, reagents, and catalysts to make, and takes approximately 25 chemical steps. Some of these stages have extremely dangerous ingredients, such as trimethylsilyl-cyanide. The original end-to-end manufacturing process developed required 9 to 12 months to go from raw materials at contract manufacturers to the finished product of Remdesivir. But after restarting production in January 2020, Gilead Sciences was able to find ways to reduce the production time to just 6 months. The initial distribution of the drug in the US, therefore, wasn't stopped by production bottlenecks, but was tripped up by seemingly capricious decision-making and finger-pointing, resulting in over a week of confusion and frustration among healthcare providers and patients alike. On the 9th of May 2020, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, explained in a statement that it would be distributing Remdesivir vials to state health departments, then would allow each department to redistribute vials to hospitals in their respective states based upon each department's insight into community-level needs. Until then, the distribution of the vials across the country had been very, very varied, and some areas were getting far more than other areas that were requesting them. But how does Remdesivir actually work as a drug? Remdesivir is what's known as a nucleotide prodrug of an adenosine analog. The active metabolite part of Remdesivir interferes with the action of viral RNA-dependent RNA polymerase production. In some viruses, it causes this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase to pause, but its predominant effect, as it was expected to work in Ebola, is to induce an irreversible chain termination. Chain termination for any chemical reaction is when it ceases the formation of reactive intermediates in a chain propagation step in the course of a polymerization reaction, effectively bringing the whole reaction to a halt. So, in simpler terms, Remdesivir works by stopping the RNA from producing RNA polymerase, which is needed to produce more copies of the virus. For the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase in SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for the COVID-19 disease, arrest of RNA synthesis occurs after incorporation of just 3 additional nucleotides, and therefore Remdesivir is classified as a direct-acting antiviral agent that works as a delayed chain terminator. Of course, Remdesivir isn't without its side effects, the most common being headaches, nausea, and rashes. However, in rarer cases, it can lead to hypersensitivity and infusion-related reactions. To counteract these extreme side effects, the manufacturer advises slower infusion rates, with a maximum infusion time of up to 120 minutes to prevent the signs and symptoms of hypersensitivity. If significant hypersensitivity does occur, however, they're ordered to discontinue the treatment immediately. The manufacturer does advise not giving the treatment to people who are pregnant. However, there is no information actually available on whether it affects children during pregnancy, and it will be offered to patients who ask for it in compassionate use cases. Likewise, Remdesivir is available from the FDA through their EUA for children in the treatment of pediatric patients. However, again, it is not recommended, and there's insufficient data on the safety and efficacy of using Remdesivir to treat COVID-19 in patients under 12 years old. Remdesivir hit global headlines after Donald Trump's endorsement of it, and he himself received the drug during his time as president, especially when he caught the virus and had to be treated for it. However, because of his controversial support of the disease, it also underwent intense scrutiny across the world, leading to its delayed rollout in countries outside of America. Now that we've discussed Remdesivir, I'm going to pass on to Shrey to discuss the last of the drugs we're talking about today, Dexamethasone.
So, the last drug we're going to talk about was actually the first approved for use against COVID-19, and it's dexamethasone. So, before the COVID-19 pandemic, dexamethasone was on the list of essential medicines of the WHO, and it was used to treat severe skin conditions, anaphylaxis, and nausea. And it's a steroid, it's a corticosteroid. So that's not to be confused with the anabolic steroids that are used to build muscles. Those are a Class C drug. And what they did was to find dexamethasone as a treatment for COVID-19. It was the recovery trial, which is the randomized evaluation of COVID-19 therapy. And it was funded by the NIHR, which is the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, as well working with Oxford University. And they had a trial group with 2,100 people given 6 milligrams of dexamethasone a day for 10 days. And they compared it to 4,300 people in the control group, which were given no additional treatment. And remember, this was at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic was relatively new. We're talking about kind of early 2020 to early to mid 2020. So it was still quite a few unknown things about the virus as well at that point. What they found was that dexamethasone is advised to be used for people with severe or critical COVID-19, so people who are really sick with COVID-19, but not for those with non-severe COVID-19. So that means people who are hospitalized, people with on oxygen with COVID or ventilation or ECMO. For people with who are pregnant, a different corticosteroid is used. I think there's some problems with dexamethasone for that, and there's stuff like hydrocortisone and stuff like that that can be used instead. It's given as a pill, or it can also be given as an injection. People in the trial were given a mixture, and its efficacy is 1 in 3 deaths are prevented for people on ventilators. 1 in 5 people on oxygen, their life gets saved by dexamethasone. And however, there's no significant benefit unless you're on oxygen, at least on oxygen, and that's why it's not recommended for non-severe COVID-19. And how it works is that dexamethasone mimics the natural hormones produced by the adrenal glands, and they reduce inflammation and also have some immunosuppressant behavior. So you might be wondering, why is an immunosuppressant used to treat COVID-19? So actually, when you have really severe COVID-19, your immune system basically goes into complete overdrive, and you produce too many cytokines, too many. It just goes a bit berserk. And what happens is your own cells start to get damaged because of the overstimulation of the immune system, and that can really damage, like, for example, the lung tissue and stuff like that. And by giving dexamethasone, because it's anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressing, it can basically calm down the immune response, and that can allow the body time to recover, and therefore increase the chances of you surviving COVID-19. So I hope you've learned a bit more about COVID-19 medicines, and there obviously new ones are coming out every couple of months, because everyone wants to be able to be the one to have the drug that cured COVID. But I have some questions for my friends here. Do you think, for example, there's some ethical challenges with this? Do you think now with vaccine rollouts as well, that perhaps it's less necessary now to have drugs against COVID-19? It's better to invest more in vaccine rollout than to invest in drugs?
Yeah, so arguably, as with all branches of medicine, prevention is better than cure, and the vaccine is absolutely essential in preventing the spread of COVID-19 from getting too much. It reduces the transmissibility. It also means that people won't have to go to the hospital as much. And arguably, it means that people might have less of a need for these medications. If they're vaccinated, their symptoms will be less serious, and they'll be able to fight off COVID with their own immune system. So I would argue that the vaccine system does have its merits over treating COVID with medication, but the converse is true too. We need medication to treat people who already have it, especially those who are more vulnerable and for whom the vaccine might not be enough.
I agree with Adrian. I think that in a lot of countries, while in some countries vaccination still has a long way to go, in countries such as the UK, which has an over 90% first dose vaccination rate, that increased vaccination spending on the vaccination rollout won't really affect numbers, and instead offering a treatment in the form of drugs might do a lot to reduce COVID cases and, more importantly, reduce hospitalizations and deaths.
Okay, I'm going to give you this classic interview question. Do you think it's fair that people who are unvaccinated should be treated with these drugs when actually in some cases people who are vaccinated and not given these drugs?
Yeah, so again, it's a tough ethical question. But we shouldn't ever exclude people because of their medical choices. Again, it's a fundamental medical ethic that they do have the autonomy to choose whether they want the vaccine or not. You shouldn't ever discriminate on that purpose. So really, it shouldn't have any effect on whether they get the drug or not. And it should be other factors such as whether it's available or the severity of their symptoms that determine it.
And many of for example, Remdesivir and Dexamethasone were used previously for other things. They weren't primarily used for COVID. Do you think there are other drugs that could perhaps help that we use already, or perhaps do you think it's better to use existing drugs, given that we already know a lot about them, or is it better to specifically develop medications for COVID-19, like I think Paxlovid was?
I think that developing drugs is not a process where you develop a drug for one disease and then you just move on if it doesn't work. Like we saw in the case with Remdesivir, it was originally developed for hepatitis C, but because it was already discovered, they decided to test it against other types of drugs to make sure that they weren't missing a trick. And now we've seen that it's very effective against the COVID-19 disease. So I definitely think that drug testing shouldn't just be limited to a specific thing. And I think it's worthwhile testing older drugs that maybe weren't as effective against the intended targets, but can be effective against newer diseases.
Yeah, I definitely think that there are many drugs that we perhaps haven't looked at that could be really useful for COVID. So I hope you've enjoyed our exploration of different COVID-19 medications, and there are many more out there that we haven't been able to cover. Please subscribe to the Medisodes YouTube channel, and also check us out on Spotify and other platforms to get weekly podcasts about medical topics. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.